All right, this is kind of a part one to the Tagris winery connection to James J. Pettigrew. What got me investigating this was my research into the underground facilities that were connected to the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. I began with the Radar Hill area out in Othello, Washington on the Franklin and Grant County line. This is an area that I had a lot of familiarity with because when I was a kid, we moved to Eltopia, Washington, which is right next to the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, when I was about 10 years old. And that's when my father got a job at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, all right? And so about 1984 and 1985 time frame is when they started making a purchase of the farm. I didn't know why we were buying a farm except until like maybe about a couple years later. I was given the information that James Pettigrew, my grandfather on my mother's side, had been accused of sexually abusing a child, and that they were trying to liquidate James's assets to protect him financially from what they claimed to be a false accusation, but turned out to be a true one. Now, this is where everything gets dicey, folks, because it's my personal belief and my personal intuition that nobody was clueless about the fact that James was a pedophile at that time. So the fact that he was let go by both a judge or that anybody would have testified on his behalf to say that he was clean would have been a disingenuous thing on their behalf based on what I personally know about James, what I know about Martha, his wife, and what I know about his daughter, who is my mother. It is my personal belief that these people have been dishonest about their business relationships relative to James J. Pettigrew and how it affects the rest of my family, and how much of the rest of my family is conscious and aware, and how much of them are wishing to hide it, or how many would like it revealed as much as I do. I don't know. But all I know is that I'm kind of alone on this one right now, so I'm just going to have to explain it to you the way I've learned it. Now, 1985, we moved to Eltopia. And that's when we got this farm that used to be owned by this guy, Robert Wells. And you can see in this article here that Martha Pettigrew was hosting an event with the Wells. And so if you run that next time frame wise around 1970 to in this other article I'm going to show you, is you can see that James Pettigrew had owned parallel operations involving the Alpha hay cubing businesses called the Tri-County Producers in Othello, which matches the location of where the current operation of Tagris Winery's Arete Vineyards are, that are growing grapes for Alicio Silva wines. Now my interest has really peaked because they're combining my father's side of the family, Silva, with something that's connected to a loose business operation. It's loosely connected to James J. Pettigrew through the winery. And then as I started discovering that James J. Pettigrew had a connection to the Finders Cult, the child trafficking organization, using the fake name Marion David Petty. And that was also a surrogacy, where there was a guy out there that represented James and could play the character and get interviewed by people. But he was effectively a surrogate that did things on behalf of James Pettigrew. And James Pettigrew had lots of these surrogates, is what I'm learning.
Yeah, but you're not the one stuck under house arrest like a sitting duck.
Oh, yeah, that's my father. That's why we had the meeting here, so that he couldn't interfere.
Interfere? I'd have pulled down your pants and spanked your ass raw.
I'm sorry, have we met?
Oh, yes, this is Larry Middleman. He's your father's surrogate.
Surrogate?
That's right, you dumb.
I hired this guy to wear a camera in his hat so he could be my eyes and ears while I'm stuck in this penthouse.
This camera helps me keep tabs on you idiots, while this thing rubs my ankle raw.
I mean, look at this thing.
I can't even go in the hallway
Without hearing that
beep, beep, beep.
That's one of my partners. Excuse me. They're going to try to get their hands on any evidence they can to hurt the family.
So you're saying shred the evidence?
No, that's illegal. The prosecution is entitled to that evidence. Without it, they don't have a case.
So you're saying shred the evidence?
That's a felony. And I certainly couldn't endorse anything like that.
Gotcha. Wink.
Wink. Did you say wink, or did you wink?
He said that too, Dad.
We'll talk soon, folks. Thank you.
Where are you going? Where's the surrogate going? Stay there. I want to see what he's going to say. Don't leave.
And then as I started discovering that James J. Pettigrew had a connection to the Finders cult, the child trafficking organization, using the fake name Marion David Petty. And that was also a surrogacy, where there was a guy out there that represented James and could play the character and get interviewed by people. But he was effectively a surrogate that did things on behalf of James Pettigrew. And James Pettigrew had lots of these surrogates, is what I'm learning. Marion David Petty of the Finders cult was just one. Okay? And that organization also had connections to CIA Counterintelligence. You're going to find that's going to be a consistent thread here. How did that happen? We'll get into that topic another time, but that's going to connect to CIA Counterintelligence operative head, I should say. His name was James Jesus Angleton, and many believe he's responsible for forming what is today the CIA. Now, if you understand that that was an original surrogate, that the man himself, as you've been led to believe as James Jesus Angleton, was always a surrogate connected to James Pettigrew, keeping in mind my grandfather that was married to Sarah Silva, his name was Jesus Cruz. So you have James Pettigrew, Jesus Cruz, James Jesus Angleton. Angleton's because the CIA Counterintelligence, from my research, had a connection and still maintains a connection to this very day, and are actively still doing things under the name the Order of Nine Angles, which is a Nazi satanic occult group that performs ritual sacrifice, is heavily involved in the manipulation of children, abusing children, and has a network of proud child abusers that have absolutely no remorse. It is part of their doctrine to abuse children and get them to self-abuse, and get them recording their self-abuse on camera, or the abuse of children being recorded on camera as part of their ritual practice. It is not a joke, folks. It is a dead serious organization that currently in the United States has actually had active homicides that are continuation crimes that connect to the Zodiac killer. And we have a federal bureau that seems to be completely negligent about really addressing it head on, despite the articles that they have been putting out that show otherwise. Okay, so the Order of Nine Angles, as far as I can tell, beyond just the Zodiac connection, has just been a protected set of CIA counterintelligence assets that are part of these Nazi bloodlines. They go all the way back to 1945 that were brought into America. The ones that were MK Ultra trained to be assassins, they oftentimes become part of the Order of Nine Angles and go out and do all the sort of ritual practice with the pentagrams, the Nazi symbols, doing blood sacrifice. If you understand Nazism at its roots, this is all consistent because blood sacrifice is how they amplify symbols. Sexual trauma, violent trauma are all ways of programming the biofield in the field of psychoenergetics. It's not just simply a belief, ladies and gentlemen. Like the way they practice witchcraft is industrial strength, studied, practiced, military scale, understanding of how blood sacrifice works and how to amplify their own influence over others using that. Now, they don't like to do this under their own names. They like to hide behind the scenes. And so part of what my research has done is I've peeled back the layers as to how James J. Pettigrew and all of his associated bloodlines have been operating in America since the 40s. So it began with that original relationship with James Pettigrew, CIA, which was done with a surrogacy involving James Jesus Angleton. So when you think James Jesus Angleton, you just need to think of the Nazi bloodline families, the ones connected to Leon Oskin and my grandfather, James Pettigrew, okay? And that would be the Hollywood connection to the actors who do all the, the hyper-realistic fakery and the fake trials, the mock trials, the ones that are involved with the paparazzi, the ones that are involved with the Mockingbird media. The reason why we don't get real journalism, folks, is because it all leads back to these Mockingbird journalist bloodlines that are all practicing O9A occult sacrifice. And that's why these crimes go unsolved, and that's why the media will almost always take will almost always prefer the killers over the victims. and that real victims are almost never shown an interest in finding the actual killers. You know, we have almost 40-some thousand missing people in this country a year, and the media only focuses on a handful of cases, ladies and gentlemen. It's because of their relationship with CIA Counterintelligence, how they hide most of those cases, and that there's exploits within the human trafficking hotline that you're going to probably find will lead back to a lot of the same operations I'm discussing here, but that's a whole other topic. Now, we need to get deeper into showing you some of the records here as corroborative evidence. So I'm going to show you the articles that demonstrate that, number one, we had that farm there again with Robert Wells, and you can see there Martha Pettigrew hosted an event back then, and then that will link you into the article from 1970 on May 1st that shows that James J. Pettigrew had a parallel alfalfa operation with P.J. Taggarus. That is the same P.J. Taggarus whose current relatives own and operate the Taggarus Winery, the Arete Vineyards, and all the associated things with it. They also own a very impressive island housing operation called Blakely Island, where basically you have to take a boat out there, and it's a nice private island with hardly anybody on there. And well, this family has got property out there. So every time you hear about those elites having these little escape plans, just remember Blakely Island. So yeah, basically though, James Pettigrew basically will just create a parallel operation, have a family like this with a whole history and everything like that associated with it. He runs a parallel operation. He uses a lot of people that came from those POW camps who need to have new names and new identities. I'm not suggesting that Taggarus is one of them. I'm just saying that the likelihood that it could be is there, especially if you know that that's basically who James always had relationships with everywhere. It's only people he could do that with, okay? That's kind of how it worked. Now, what adds even more weight to this is that I actually investigated out there. I went out to Arete Vineyard. It is, in fact, right next to where the Agape boys, the Agape boarding school for boys is. That's the same operation that I've been talking about for several years now. Nobody listened to me, by the way. And that it wasn't until years after I'd first reported about it on the Basis Project that anything got done about it. That was in like about 2 years ago. They finally tracked that same school and the same operators as I've been reporting on for years. They tracked them out to Missouri, and they had child abuse allegations against them at that camp. So I'm concerned about the meaning behind that bottle of wine, about the wine that I found connected to Taggarus Taverna. So when you look into this, folks, what I'm suggesting to you is the same operation here you see James connected to. That's connected to this bottle of wine that says Alicio Silva. And so when you look deeper into that, you can see that Taggarus, read it, Taggarus backwards spells, Taggarus is S-E-R-A-G-G-A-T, Sarah Gate. Okay? Sorry, not Gigi, but I got that backwards, but and then his initials PJ backwards are JP for James Pettigrew. JP, James Pettigrew, PJ. They said for him it was Peter Jr. or something like that, Taggarus. Okay. But that's right next to that operation, which is connected to this, which has this crude description. See, young babes, nice mouthfeel, take them home for the evening. And folks, my grandma, Sarah, she'd never tolerate that. So, just look at her, and I can just tell you that that's her, and that was her mother. And these aren't women that played that. That's not them. That's not their personality. That was James Pettigrew's personality. That's the way James thinks. That's the type of things James bragged about. My grandma, Sarah, never, not even close. And so you can understand that in modern day times, when I come out here to Richland, Washington, and I'm researching all this and see where that red circle is, that's where I found, my brother had 2 relatives working, and that's where all of this is connected to. That's where PJ Taggarus has that current operation with his current, the generations that are now a couple away from PJ. This is where it's all run from out here. And then to learn that my brother's partnering with him the same way James partnered with PJ back in the 1970, but not disclosing it openly, kind of making it a loose association with not a lot of, at least in my opinion, I didn't get a lot of honesty surrounding that. Now, what makes this even more curious is if you go back to the 80s, around the same time as we bought the farm with PJ Taggeris, guess what I found? Well, it says here, PJ Taggeris had it was a millionaire found guilty of a $460,000 spud fraud. I mean, think about that. $460,000 spud fraud. And that was with J.R. Simplot. So between Simplot and that financial fraud involving commodities trading that happened in the 80s, that's the same time as our family was buying that farm and laundering James's records for the child abuse things that were going on back then, which is making me wonder, like, what really happened here with my family? What's really the true origin of why we wound up out there in Eltopia at that farm? What really happened with that lawsuit in James, Because I don't think James was a normal guy. Because when you start looking deeper into PJ Taggeris, if he was his surrogate, he was a guy that really was a big deal out there. He was a multimillionaire. He had a private jet. He drove a Mercedes. He had all of the vehicles on his farm painted white. His house was painted white. All the telephone poles were painted white. He was a eccentric character that was known all across the state that could actually entertain guys from the big city. Agents, politicians would come and see him. I have articles here about it. This was my grandfather, James J. Pettigrew's business partner. It's weird, right? So, it does support the notion that James was in CIA counterintelligence as a kingmaker, as a surrogate maker, and that's how he controls commodities markets. Because again, $460,000 spud fraud. Folks, what makes this even more telling is that after my family had already alfalfa cubed out there, you know what they did after that? They began to spud farm. And they did it with a surrogate using our farm to do their spuds on. And it wasn't that family. It wasn't J.R. Simplot. It was a family with a different name who won't disclose right now. But I will say that the family that has been made into kings. Today, out in Washington State, the people that used to have spuds on our farm in Eltopia are now one of the biggest spud producers and in charge of things out at Lamb Weston, is like one of the hugest operations. Or maybe it's Agri Northwest. I can't remember. I think it's Lamb Weston. The point is, though, is that now, in modern times, they've just shifted it from that J.R. Simplot to PJ Taggeris to the family friends of who my dad had while we were farming out there, whose name I'm not going to say now. I will say, though, that one has a name that matches the guy that invented the Waldorf salad, I think is what it's called. Yeah. Trippy, right? I'm just going to leave it at that so you can figure it out on your own. But that would support, again, the whole CIA counterintelligence, the giving people fake names, because that would say that the guy that got involved with a spud operation with our family had another one of these sort of surrogate fake names that was assigned to them based on the same network of people that leads back out to the Tule Lake segregation facility and then all the Nazis that came in from out there. So that's kind of the history involving our farm, how it connects to the modern operations today. And so I guess I'm just looking for answers from my family and from anybody. Well, look, I don't really care what my family thinks anymore. They've kind of made it clear that none of them are going to answer to this. But this is just so that the rest of the world has the facts in place, because sometimes when I try to do this on those live streams that are a few hours long, it's kind of hard to piece together the information in a way that's quick that most people can understand. But, my hope is that this did the job, and that it put it together for you folks in a way that's clear and easy to understand.